So the world is safe. People are good. Life is predictable, and I can cope. But imagine that a person walks out of their house and all of a sudden they either witnessed or being in a life-threatening event shakes that all up. And so the world all of a sudden just switched in a minute. So you know what? Maybe the world is not so safe because, there's this terrorist all of a sudden did that. People are not so good. Why is this person that I look up to or this community rabbi, these horrible acts that this person did? And in 1 minute, the domino effect, everything just crashes because in my understanding about the world, this couldn't happen and it did happen. So what does that mean? It means it can happen. It just moved from the realm of impossible to possible. So if it's possible, then it can happen. It can happen again. And not only that, it can happen to me. So the world isn't safe and people aren't good and life isn't predictable. And I can cope. And I'm a strong person and now I can't cope. So that's all stacked up together with all of the physiological and emotional effects that come from experiencing a trauma.
Hey, I'm Esther, and you are listening to On Your Own, the podcast for Jewish girls living away from home. Each week, we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you confidently navigate life on your own so you can achieve real growth and independence and take ownership of this foundational stage of your life. For additional resources, tips, and to stay up to date on future episodes, sign up for the On Your Own newsletter, linked below in the description. Looking forward to spending some time with you today. And now, to this week's episode. Dr. Shula Wittenstein, welcome to On Your Own. We're so excited to have you. I wanted to start by just asking you to introduce yourself, share with the audience a little bit about who you are and what your mission is as it relates to your work.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for having me. I think it's a beautiful thing that you're doing for Am Yisrael. And very dear to my heart, of course, are the seminary girls who I work with in Eretz Yisroel and who go back to America and are integrating back into their homes, as well as everyone else who needs that support. So about me, just real quickly, I've been in Israel for almost 35 years, which is a big zchus. And in practice for about 28 years. And I primarily, I work with individuals. So whether it's seminary girls or other individuals, women mostly, couples, and with a range of different types of presenting issues, whether anxiety, depression, or trauma, which is our topic for today. And I live here with my family and my grandchildren, and it's the only place I would ever want to be. It's about me.
Wow. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into this field? Because I know today, you said 28 years of practice. Today it's become a very big, ask someone what they're doing, like psychology. But I don't know if it was so common, that many years ago. How did you get into this?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's not actually that interesting, but it's funny. I was never planning on being a psychologist or therapist. My dream was really to be a seminary teacher. I myself got out of seminary and I was so excited that's all I wanted to do is to teach, and I was all fired up and ready to go. But as happens in the work field market, they want you to have experience, but you can't get experience unless they give you experience. So you can't get a job. So I didn't get a job as a seminary teacher. I actually ended up doing kiruv, which in my family, we're either doing kiruv or I call it kiruv krovim, and I actually ended up working for the Heritage House, standing in the bus station for 4 years in the rain, in the sun, and just meeting people, asking them if they're Jewish, and bringing them to the Heritage House in the Old City with Rabbi Meir Schuster, Zatzal. And then it was I'm trying to think if it was the first Intifada or the second Intifada. It was a long time ago. Probably it was the first. And there were really no tourists. And I just decided that I'm going to start opening my books and studying while I'm waiting for these tourists to come. So I signed up for a program and I started studying psychology. Yeah, so that was the beginning, and then with every baby came another degree.
And so then you ended up getting a doctorate.
I ended up getting a doctorate. So I got I got a bachelor's, and then in Israel, the BSW is a really good degree with a license, and then I did a concurrent master's and doctorate. The truth is, it's not the degrees that you have on your wall. It's really more about how much you care and always care to continue learning and adding more tools, so you could give your clients more resources.
We're going to be talking about trauma, which, as I told you when we spoke, I'm not super familiar with the topic myself. So I'm going to be coming from definitely a more ignorant place. So I wanted to start off by just a very basic question, if you can enlighten us, of what is trauma?
It's a great question. We hear a lot about like with any type of mental health issue, there's the slang of it, and then there's the actual definition of it. The pathology of it, like depression, anxiety, or, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious, or I'm so traumatized. And then there's real like PTSD. But actually trauma is any life-threatening or perceived life-threatening event which has a deep effect on a person's well-being. It's a distressing event. It could be terror. It could be a physical injury. It could be emotional. It could be psychological, wherein the person has a sense that they're not in control. So again, it's an event which kind of disrupts, like Steve Porges. I think that's who said it. But he says it's a disruption in connection. So the disruption in connection is biochemical. It's what happens in our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It's a disruption in social connection. It's a disruption in my sense of myself in the world, and my ability to cope. And maybe a little bit further on, we can get into some of the assumptions of a person pre-trauma and a person post-trauma, and what actually shifts in those connections. So that would be like the basic idea of trauma. Just to say a little bit more what I mean about objective trauma and a subjective trauma. So we like to call it a big T trauma or a little t trauma. So, and can you think of what would you say is like a big T trauma?
Like a capital T versus a small lowercase?
That's right, lowercase t, yeah. So what comes to mind when you think of trauma?
When I think of trauma, October 7th,
Yeah.
terrorism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Those are the really like that. It could be objective trauma, could be a car accident, a burglary, being mugged, sexual violence, domestic abuse and violence, and things like that. I think most of us could agree that that's probably, or being rushed in for surgery, things like that, emergencies. What we don't think about as much, which can make a tremendous impact, are the lowercase t traumas, like being, humiliated in front of your whole class, like a teacher who says something to you. It could be a shadchan who repeats something to you negative about yourself that the other side said, and it's becomes a trauma because the way that it disrupts connection of and sense of self in the world. It could be traumatic. So it could be an emotional duress. It could be you're planning one thing. Another population that I work with a lot is women who are pre and postpartum. And it's interesting that the research even calls, for example, an emergency, not even an emergency, but a C-section to be considered a trauma, which is very validating, of course.
Interesting. That's so
Having
interesting.
having had 7 of them, I'm like,
Yeah.
yes,
I had a
I
C-section.
qualify. But yeah. So when we
Wow.
plan our life in a certain way and then it like pushes us up, it could be very traumatic. So it could be life threatening in the sense of actually life and body, but it could be threatening in my soul, my spirit, my personhood. So it's really kind of all encompassing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it could happen almost from anything, depending on the circumstances.
Yes, and I guess yes and no, not from anything like probably any distressing, emotionally distressing thing. Possibly it depends on the person and what
Right.
they're
Anything
and
distressing.
right. And it also depends a lot on what the person has experienced in in their life before. So for example, someone who's grown up in a very safe environment and thinks about themselves and their capabilities in the world in one way, and then is so pushed off of kilter, not their center is knocked off. So it could be different. The trauma could be experienced differently than someone who's used to the hard knocks of life and looks at things in a different way.
Hmm.
For example, would you say like,
Interesting.
do you think you could say about yourself or like people in the world, do you consider the world a safe place? Generally safe place to be?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
That's based on my experience, though.
You're right. Well, it is, and it's also based on the gift that Hashem gave us, which is that we don't go around usually unless we have anxiety, thinking that the world is an unsafe place. And you and I can say that even though we
Right.
know about the Holocaust and we know about October 7th, in general, most people think the world is a safe place. So if you imagine a weight, a scale, okay? So the world is a safe place, it's heavy, and there's some bad stuff and stuff that happens in it. That's pre-trauma. After trauma, that actually turns into the world is unsafe, and then the good that's left is very small. The truth of the matter is that both of them are distorted. They're both
Hmm.
distorted, right? Because the world is not a heavy, safe place, and it's not a heavy, dangerous place. There are some things that are safe and some things that are unsafe.
It changes the way that you see the world and maybe yourself as you relate to the world.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. If we wanted to break it down a little bit, and this is really a really important thing to know, and for those of our listeners today, is to kind of conceptualize when a person is struggling with something, to identify in which of these 3 assumptions or 4 assumptions, where was I hurt? Okay, because when we go through trauma, we're not all hurt in exactly the same places, but wherever we're stuck, we're stuck. So um, let's see if we can give an example, okay? Well, we'll say first the assumptions, okay? The assumptions are number 1, like we said before, the world is essentially a good place. That's number 1. People are basically good, right? People are basically good. Agree. Um,
Right.
the world, right?
Agree.
We assume fairly that the world is a predictable place, right? Like, can you give me an example of how the world
Yeah.
is predictable?
I drop my kids off at school every day and their schools are open. And the store where I shop is always open at the same times. And when I pick them up, they're there.
That's right.
My day
Exactly.
pretty much looks the same for the good and for the bad.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you get more sleep than other times. That's maybe not so predictable how much sleep you'll get, but we don't expect to go to a daycare center to pick up our kids and for there to be a mass shooting. right? We don't expect that.
No.
So the world is basically predictable. I mean, the sun rises and the sun sets. We don't expect it to be dark in the morning and light at night. It's just like, it's predictable. It's going to happen. We don't worry about the sun setting, the sun rising. We don't worry about picking up the kids. We don't worry about, stores are going to be closed, and like no one predicted COVID, where the whole world just kind of had it. I call it like the big snow day. We all stayed home.
I love that.
As
Yeah.
adults, we want to, I don't know about you, but I always just want to have a snow day. So I have like a good excuse, like me and everyone else, we couldn't go to work today. It's like the inner child that just
Right.
wants to play in the snow. Okay,
Yeah.
so back to trauma. Okay, so the world is safe. People are good. Life is predictable. And the last one is so important. And I can cope. I can cope. Yeah, things will
Hmm.
happen. I'll drop a dozen eggs on the floor. I'll bump my knee. I'll get a big bill, or I'll hear some bad news, but I could cope. But imagine that a person walks out of their house and all of a sudden they either witnessed, because witnessing a distressing or life-threatening event, even though your life wasn't threatened, or being in a life-threatening event, shakes that all up. I thought I was gonna just drive the kids to school, and then someone rammed into me. I thought I was going to, go to deliver a baby, and then all of a sudden something happened. So from 1 minute to the next, this person had a heart attack and died. Or, we were out having a picnic with the family, and then someone got a bad headache, and then they were diagnosed with a brain tumor. By the way, for anyone listening out there, this is not to bring you towards your anxiety, predispositions to anxiety, that every headache is going to be a brain tumor. We're talking about trauma. And so the world all of a sudden just switched in a minute. So you know what? Maybe the world's not so good. The world is not so safe because, there's this terrorist all of a sudden did that. People are not so good. Why is this person that I look up to, or this community rabbi, this this is our world, these are the leaders, and all of a sudden in a minute I'm reading that there were, these horrible acts that this person did, and in 1 minute my whole, the domino effect, everything just crashes, because in my understanding about the world, this couldn't happen and it did happen. So what does that mean? It means it can happen. It just moved from the realm of impossible to possible. So if it's possible, then it can happen. It can happen again. And not only that, it can happen to me. So the world isn't safe,
Hmm.
and people aren't good, and life isn't predictable.
Wow.
And I can cope. And I'm a strong person, and now I can't cope. So that's all stacked up together with all of the physiological and emotional effects that come from experiencing a trauma. So now I can't cope. My body's acting up with hyperarousal or flashbacks, or I can't sleep, or I'm irritable. And then I isolate myself, so my social network isn't there, or I'm ashamed because something happened to me, a trauma happened to me that I didn't have control over. So I don't have those resources, and I can't cope, and I'm so alone and isolated. And we're in this whirlwind of where our assumptions and our core beliefs are all of a sudden scattered to the winds, and we have to rebuild. So it's a whopper of a,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's a big deal because
Yeah.
I remember throwing out. I was, oh, that was so traumatic. Like I've said that before. I was so traumatized. Maybe we've been throwing that out a bit lightly.
Yeah, we are traumatized actually as a nation, as Am Yisrael, we have
Hmm.
trauma in our DNA. I did a podcast, talk about podcasts. I don't do them so often, but we gave one right after October 7th. And I was talking about how actually ever since, we had Mitzrayim, we were abused, we were slaves, and then all throughout history. And then we had the pogroms, and then we had, a bunch of stuff in between. And just being a nation that's pursued and oppressed is we have trauma in our
Mm-hmm.
DNA, but what else the other thing we have in our DNA is resilience. The resilience to flex back and be strong. So trauma is a big deal, but resilience is even a bigger deal. That's what we have inside of us.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about resilience. I'm trying to understand first, like, if somebody doesn't know if if they have trauma or not, things maybe feel off suddenly, but they're not sure why, or they are sure why, but they're not sure if that's called trauma. Is it important to have that label?
Okay, good question. So maybe there are two questions here. One is how to identify trauma and its symptoms and its source. And then the other one is how important is it to have a label, which is a whole topic in and of its own. That's about any mental health. I mean, really, trauma isn't a mental health condition. It's just a condition of our humanness and going through these distressing events. PTSD is already a label or
Hmm.
chronic trauma. So, to the first question, well, it really depends. You're saying that they feel like something's off, they're not sure why. So, I guess it would depend if the event was a recent event, and we would want to treat it in one way. Whereas if a person is feeling it and they're wondering if they have become re traumatized and it's something that's very old and it's showing up in their life now,
Hmm.
which could oftentimes happen. Let's say, for example, if somebody was abused, whatever type of abuse when they were young, and they're a fairly resilient person, or they've done their therapy, they've done their work, they've done their healing journey, and then um, they go to give, they go into labor, and they're manhandled in a way that's not sensitive, or they're mishandled physically or emotionally, and when they're in a very vulnerable state, and then they're feeling something strange and they don't really know what it is and they can't identify it, or they minimize it like, oh, well, this happens to everyone, so look, why am I feeling so bad? Um, if it's the first example, which it's something that happened recently, then we want to help the person understand and normalize that when difficult things happen, they're not going to feel themselves, perhaps immediately after the event. Okay, or what we like to say is, it's the right reaction. And I forgot how to say it, for an unusual situation. For an extreme situation, you have an extreme
Hmm.
reaction. So it's really normal.
So it's a normal reaction.
It's a normal. Oh, that's it. You got it. Thanks. Thank you. It's a normal reaction for an abnormal situation. That's what I was looking for.
Hmm.
So then we want to give them a certain skill set and resource them and debrief. If it's something from the past, then it's a different type of work. Um,
Hmm.
as in terms of the giving
Hmm.
labels, so it's interesting. How I personally feel about it has really nothing to do with how my clients feel about it. So to each his own, and then we have to collaborate around it. What I believe is that information is knowledge, and if a person is struggling with something and it has a name, then perhaps there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a formula, so to speak, towards healing. Whereas if it's just
Hmm.
a set of circumstances where I don't know what it is, then, you know, then I could feel lost. But some people really don't like that. Some people feel really boxed in by a label and they feel different, and it actually adds insult to injury and makes them feel even different, even more different than they already feel. I'm different than other people. Something's wrong with me. So they don't really appreciate having the label. So I think it's the sensitivity, however the person wants to call it. But the main thing is to legitimize to the
Hmm.
person. Yeah, something real, like you said. You said before, oh, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Something real happened.
Hmm. There's nothing wrong with you if you feel totally different and things are thrown upside down because this was a real this was a real thing.
Sure. There's something really right with you. for feeling like this. There's something really human about you. There's something that your body and your mind are trying to process.
Would you say that trauma is a way of is actually just the body and the soul's processing system for something difficult?
Absolutely. Experiencing the way that the body and the mind, the brain metabolizes and helps us through trauma, helps us work through the trauma, is a processing. The absence or the blockage of the processing is when a person has PTSD. They're not able to process. The truth of the matter is that
Oh,
naturally, yeah, I'll explain to you the nuances here.
really?
Naturally, the way that Hashem created us is to be able to process difficult material. We're able to process it. As a matter of fact, only a very small percent of people will develop PTSD. If you take, I don't know, 20 people on a bus bomb. That's not the terrorism we have today, but that's what comes to mind. I remember when I worked in the bus station, there were like bombs going off like outside Times
Wow.
Square Market that year.
Oh my God.
Only maybe two of them will develop proper PTSD, but the rest will
Wow.
naturally process the trauma. We are wired that way with social support and with rest, exercise, good nutrition, spirituality, connecting to ourselves and Hashem. We are able to process it. Um, when it gets stuck, that's where the real problem is. We're naturally resilient. We're naturally drawn towards wanting to live and wanting to survive. Yeah.
I'm starting to think of this like so differently than the way I understood it until now. So I'm just having a lot of a lot of thoughts. I'm throwing this out there because it hasn't been formulated, but is the process of the original thing that causes the trauma, like I think that the world is good, I believe I can cope in it, is that like innately what we're trying to is that innately good, and that's what we're trying to get back to in having the trauma? Because is it a good thing that I now feel like I
It's a great no. You are. It makes so much sense, and it's brilliant. Your question is really really smart. Such a good question. It's not even such a straightforward answer because, as we said before, that was skewed. That was also skewed. That the world is a safe and predictable place. Well, predictable, yeah, but that it's a safe place
right?
and that people are good. There is a certain part of it that's skewed. So, what do we actually want to believe? Do we want to go back to La La Land? Well, first of all, we can't because the imprint of whatever happened to us, it's going to be with us. So, what we're looking to do is something a little bit different. Okay, what we're looking to do is move back to a place where we can introduce our choices. We spoke about the four assumptions, but the three other disturbances that happen to a person when they go through trauma is, again, the safety piece is how safe am I? How safe is the world? The other one is how responsible am I for what happened? And the other one
Hmm.
is, do I have choices? So if I'm walking down a dark alleyway and I'm mugged, so is the world safe? Am I responsible? Whose fault was it? Should I have walked down there? Shouldn't I have? Or if I, left the baby for 1 second and then a hot tea spilled, and then whose responsibility was that? And do I understand safety? And so now this happened to me, so I don't have choices anymore about my life because now I'm branded in a certain way because of what happened to me, or I identify with what happened to me, so I don't have that many choices in my life. Okay, so those are the other places where they
What do you
disturb.
mean? I'm not understanding the choices part of it exactly.
Choices could be, do I have choices now? Can I be free to choose my trajectory in life after what happened to me? Maybe I am a second rate person. Maybe I can't trust the choices that I made because I didn't know the choice that I made to leave the baby or walk down that alleyway was a poor choice. So how do I know if I can trust myself anymore? So maybe I should just stay small and stay at home and play it safe because I can't trust my own choices. Okay, so that's kind of like parallel to I can cope. There's some connection over there. So what we're aiming towards is not to go back to all those original assumptions. It wouldn't be possible. We're looking for, and now here I'll introduce a whole other concept, which is the trauma brain. So fascinating. There's so much to say about it. The trauma brain, which kind of zhuzhes up the chronology of what happened. What do I mean by that? So we know, if you could imagine, if you could visualize 3 circles. So we have past, okay? Then if we make another circle, it would overlap a little bit the past, right? Because the past does influence the present. So there would be like a tiny overlap. And if we had a third circle that would overlap to present, that would be future. Okay, so we have this chain where past and present overlap and present and future overlap, but a little bit. And we're living in the present. After trauma, the way that it looks is past is the circle, present overlaps 3/4 of the circle, and future overlaps with that. And we're stuck in the heart of that storm where there's no past, present, and future. It's all one big tornado. Chaos, fear, terror.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. That's what trauma is? Like if somebody has trauma, that's what it feels like, or is that PTSD?
It could be both. It depends how on the continuum, if they qualify to they checklist all the parts for PTSD. But the essence of being in the eye of the storm of the trauma is there's no past, there's no future, there's no present, everything. So how would that look? Let's say, for example, if somebody was in a car accident and they try to drive or they go near a red Toyota, so they don't know, their body starts to get activated and they're in the past but not the present, and the future is that they'll never drive again. And this is more PTSD. They're smelling like the smoke and they're hearing the music that was on at the time of the crash, and they're locked in over there. That would be more by PTSD. More of an example that has to do with relational trauma. So far, we've spoken a lot about objective, big capital letter T traumas, but a relational trauma where a person, let's say, was abandoned, or neglected, that is trauma, or abused is trauma. So they are trying to have a relationship, whether it's a friendship or they're dating someone or they're married to someone, and they're trying to emotionally connect or physically connect, and their body freezes. In those moments, they are in trauma state where they might as well be 5 years old. They're not able to be in the here and now. So to answer your question, it's a little bit long-winded, but to answer your question, what we're trying to help the person do is restore chronology. That would be a really good way of saying it. To leave the past in the past. I like to call it, let's bury it dead, not alive. Not kicking up. It's over. It's in the past. It's over now. We're trying to help the person's psyche and nervous system understand that it's over now. It's in the past. It's over now. To help them to live peacefully in the present and have hope for the future. We're looking a lot more for that than we're looking to restore all those assumptions. Now, obviously, we want to restore those assumptions to a certain degree because the world really is predictable and sometimes it's not. Like I was thinking about this the other day. I'm at work and I'm washing my dish, which I never do. I always leave it for the other therapist to wash for me because I like when people do my dishes. but I was being so proud of myself. I was watching this beautiful, gorgeous ceramic bowl that I love. I'm washing it and it dropped out of my hand and cracked. And I was thinking like, but 10 seconds before, but 1 second before, I was just great. I'm doing my dish and I'll put it there like I put it there every single day. Well, someone puts it there, but let's say it didn't crack. So it feels unpredictable, but we're able to store that information differently than a trauma because dishes crack. We know that. We're going to drop them, they're going to break. But people don't crack and people don't randomly. So,
But if a person is traumatized, is it possible that that event would feel like, you see, the world is just so unpredictable and I can't even keep things together and what's wrong with me? And
oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes. The book is so true. You really, for not having so much experience in this, you're really on it. You really get it. It's exactly what happened. It starts to generalize into their personhood. Yeah, I'm worthless. Bad things will continue to happen to me. I can't trust myself, etc. And then there are all different therapies. I don't know if we have time to get into it about how to dislodge and heal those beliefs and get the chronology back to where there's something. It would look like this instead of, it's happening now. I'm frozen now. The accident is now, or the abuse is now. It would look like, wow, that was scary then. I'm safe now. That's what we're looking for. Yeah, if you could think of anything that ever happened in your life and have a sense of the chronology, if you're able to see it as, wow, it was then. And when you think about that space, it could still hurt for a moment. You could have a twinge of fear, but you know full well that you're here and now. Maybe our listeners could take a minute to think about that and see where they're holding on that continuum.
Okay, so I have a question about this. How do you then know if, because you feel like it was then, it's because you're blocking out the severity of what happened, or because you're really able to you've really moved on?
Hmm. Tell me more. How would that look?
Because I'm thinking of, I've had two miscarriages, but one that I had was more like later, and when I used to just not think about it. I just like it never came up, and I think that was on purpose. Like, and then I had this like weird experience where I spoke to this emotion code person. Are you familiar with emotion code?
A little bit, very little bit. Yeah.
I had this one, like literally once off. It was right before my baby was born, and I had a ton of anxiety. And then she was like, "Oh, when you were 22, something happened with pregnancy," and then like I just started. Then I then in that moment, I remember feeling everything that I'd felt exactly when that happened. And now when I think back to it, it momish feels like that was in the past. Like that was sad, and it was in the past. But I used to just not feel anything because I hadn't like worked through it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, I was
Well,
blocking it.
yeah. Well, first, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's very difficult, especially as a young mom. Um, so yeah, exactly like what you're describing. Look, it's the mind will not release information until we're really ready to cope with it or to substitute it for something that's more adaptive. Okay? So if there's a traumatic information that would knock me off my center, okay, then the mind is, Hashem made our mind so clever that it will keep it repressed for a long time. That's the whole thing with, like, I don't know if you know the literature on false memory and on memory and old memories, people that were like suing their parents for child abuse when they like 30 years later, they started remembering things, and was it that the therapist created it or was it there? But there is such a thing as a repressed memory because a person is not safe enough in their life to be able to address that memory. Um, there is
Wow.
also there's also like in true PTSD, that's the whole problem, is that the avoidance of the memory, but the needing to remember it at the same time in order to process it is where things get stuck. So the visualization that I always use, maybe it's nerdy, but it helps me so, is like when you're putting like a big carrot through the food processor and it gets stuck. But like it's so stuck that you can't pull it out, but you can't push it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? And you like cut your finger on the pivot. But that's what a trauma is like. You can't put it in. So if you're avoiding it, then you can't process it, you can't process it, you can't get through it. So it sounds like what you're describing is
Mhm.
that it was extremely painful. By the way, let's not confuse trauma with sadness. Sadness is a normal human emotion that's there to give us information. There's nothing that's off of that sadness. Sadness is not depression. Pain and grief is not complex grief. It's just being human. So it sounds like at that moment that she brought it up, I don't know what was going on in your life then, or if you already had a family, or what was going on, that you were able to access it and feel all of
Wow.
it. And you had like a wave of
Yeah.
a release, which might not have been that comfortable, but essentially it passed through you and it helped it to be in the past.
It got it like unstuck.
I gotta unstuck. You might cry about it still. You might have a moment of sadness when you think of the day and the family, the size family that you can have. I myself had a stillborn, full-term stillborn, and
Wow.
I work with women who are
Sorry.
postpartum. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was many years ago, and I remember going right back to work and helping the women, and they're feeling this and that, and I thought I was okay. I was okay, and then just randomly, from a story that was not even objectively very traumatic or very anything, boom, the tears, the feelings, the everything, and woo, it all went. And then we're able to leave it in the past and enjoy our life now, which is what we all want.
So our brain decides when we're ready to to be able to process something difficult that happened or a trauma or a very difficult emotion, and then when it feels we're ready, it can bring it up.
I wouldn't say that's 100% true in all the cases. When a person's already in the throes of a disorder and it's embedded differently. But yes, if there's a trauma that a person knows about, and for some reason they're just like, yeah, it happened, but they remember it, but I think I'm okay. I think it doesn't bother me so much. Maybe I maybe no. I'm talking about in a healthy state of things, then the trauma could be released when they're feeling more ready to do it. And we don't try to pull it out of them prematurely.
So I'm thinking of coping mechanisms, like almost like our brain has different coping mechanisms for it. And you're saying like fight, freeze, and flight. Would those be the different ways that the brain copes with it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could tell you, and if you want to hear an interesting, I have a lot of different stories, obviously, but a fight, flight, freeze. So I was part of Ichoratzala in their psychotrauma unit. It's called Chosen. So basically, they trained. I think, the second group that they trained. Now they've trained many people. This was many years ago, and we would go to the site of different accidents or suicide or different things, and we would be there with the family right when it happened. So you would think, what could you possibly help out? I mean, I'm not a paramedic, and even though my father's a doctor, emergency room doctor, I really don't like blood and I could faint from it. That's an interesting reaction. Like, I don't enjoy that. So I think this was in Harnov. There was a car that was flipped over. I didn't even have my Hatzalah jacket with me. I was just driving by, and I went to try to help the people afterwards who were helping out with the accident. So I saw this yeshiva bacher. He probably was about 15, in his pajamas. His eyes looked like a little bit like, I don't know, like glued to one spot, and he's a little bit roaming around outside his yeshiva. Maybe it was like, why would he have been in his pajamas if it was only 8 o'clock at night? Maybe he was hanging, I don't know, in his room or something. And he had gone down, and he ran towards the car to help this lady out of a smoke-filled car. That was a story. And I still saw the car there. And I started talking to him. And I want to stay on track because you asked the question, does your brain have coping mechanisms? And does the fight or flight freeze? Yes. So yes. So what happens is that in a state of extreme danger, or what we would call a traumatic event, the brain clicks in to be able to do something that we wouldn't be able to do in a normal circumstance. So what he did was he was fixated. He ran across the street. He tried to help however he could. And he was in very hyper-focused fight mode. That was a coping mechanism of the brain, was fight. Some other people that were around, their coping mechanism was flight, because that's how we protect ourselves. We're wired to survival and protect ourselves from danger. And of course, when that's not an option, then we freeze. I'm not going to get into all the chemicals and the different things that happen. And the freeze is also a coping mechanism. So like they say, you freeze like a deer in headlights. So I don't want to be too all over the place, but let's say, for example, if a person is, I don't know, being abused and they're somebody much bigger and stronger than them, they might freeze and dissociate. But anyway, back to this coping mechanism and this boy. So what I was trying to do was to bring him back to the here and now and to understand what was going on for him and to try to process so that he wouldn't be living this car accident, because he looked like he was still, like he moved from the state of fight to the state of freeze. So I was doing a little protocol with him, debriefing, which basically means, what did you do? How did you help? What happened there? And helping a person to get the resources inside and to not get to access the resources that they used, and to access more resources. Anyway, so what he started telling was so fascinating. He was processing a trauma there, right in the middle of this. I was on the sidewalk, and I was like, how were you able to do this? You're only 15. You ran in and you did it. And he's like, I was like, do you have a memory like this? And we were doing a little processing. And all of a sudden he starts to tell me that he had a sibling that was sick, and his mother was away a lot in the hospital, and his father was whatever he was doing. And so he had a certain time period where he was very responsible for the kids in the house. And one day his little sister choked on a grape, and it was on his watch. And, I think it was a serious situation. She was fine in the end. But all of a sudden, that flashback of him having to take responsibility and all the guilt of feeling like he didn't do enough, and all of the fight that he did when he went to help the lady in the smoky car, everything came back there. And he looked at me. He's like, I didn't even realize that I was holding this. And it was very funny because you and I, we live here in Eretz Yisroel, but you can imagine a little yeshiva katana boy who would never talk to some random American woman in the middle of the street in his, in his sweatsuit, telling about these emotional feelings about how his sister almost died choking on a grape because of him. And he processed it, and he felt so much better. And he defrosted right there and then. And then, all of his friends were like hanging out the windows, like, what is he doing talking to this lady?
Like, what's going on?
What's happening here?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How could this possibly show up objectively? So, like, let's say if you're looking at your roommate and suddenly, like, what would this look like from the outside in, if somebody has been traumatized and it's impacting them now?
Yeah. So before I tell you what the symptoms are, let's try to remember that immediately after a traumatic event is not the time to do any kind of real therapy. it's you just debrief and let the person talk out loud about what happened. Okay, so that's like acute trauma is when a trauma is a one-time trauma, and that's what happened, as opposed to chronic trauma or complex trauma. Um, so, like we said, a normal reaction to abnormal situation. So, if somebody had a recent trauma within days or weeks, and you see that more they're more isolating themselves. They're not. Their mood is low. Their appetite is a little bit low. They get a little bit more startled. Um, things like that. So we'll keep an eye on it and give them as much support as possible. You'll see those symptoms. But if you see someone that has sleep disturbances and they didn't have it before, even a child, this is not really so much our audience, but there's a lot to say about identifying if a child's been through a traumatic event. Um, if they start to have night terrors or not be able to fall, so insomnia, somatic reactions, headaches, stomach aches are very classic. Lower back pain, upper back pain, okay, is the way that the body copes with trauma. Is it converts it from emotional into physical pain. There are people who carry chronic pain, and or even fibromyalgia, or even the long COVID. There's a lot of trauma base. There can be a lot of trauma there. You might see, like I said before, hyper arousal, like any noises make them jump a lot. You would not want to go boo to a roommate or tickle them from the back or something, because you might get like a fist in your face. It really scare them, things like that. Not being able to concentrate. Okay. It's interesting how many children are diagnosed with ADHD when they're really PTSD, because there's an overlap of symptoms of lack of concentration, irritability, explosiveness, not being able to sit still, all of those things, hyperarousal, which have they can mimic each other. So those are some of the things that you might see in a person. So there could be like the hyperarousal and the hypoarousal.
Which is like isolation.
Yeah, agitation, being down, um, not being very reactive, apathetic, lower appetite, lower sense of enjoyment for things that hopelessness about the future.
It's interesting. So a lot of girls are dealing with things like depression, anxiety, OCD, maybe struggling with an eating disorder. Do those overlap with trauma as well?
Can can in many instances. The traumatic event or set of a series of events have impacted the brain chemistry, the body, and their core beliefs to contribute to either anxiety, depression, or any of the above. Certainly, for sure, eating disorders. I mean, we know the connection, very strong connection between perfectionism and things like that, but also sexual abuse and eating disorders, anxiety, and a highly anxious grandparent who maybe didn't traumatize you, but the need for things to be just so, or making your world unsafe because, are you sure you're wearing a sweater? Wear a sweater. You're going to fall off the bike. Or, there are some bad people out there. Be careful, be careful. But saying in a very anxious way can bring up a sense that the world is not so safe. So, yeah, after helping the person deal with their symptoms and change the ways that they think, then we might look for some of the more root issues, which could involve trauma.
So if someone thinks that they believes or knows that they have been through trauma, are dealing with this right now, what would be step number one?
So, step number one is to know that the the purpose of trauma, or the events that happen to us in this world, are to make us to give us purpose and to help us be our greatest selves. And you weren't expecting that answer, but that is really the first thing that we need to know.
No, I wasn't.
I know. I'm looking at your face. You're like,
I thought you were going
huh?
to say go to a therapist.
Huh? No. Is that the most downtrodden, some of our greatest people, like look at David HaMelech, in the Sefer Tehillim, and all the enemies that were chasing him and all of his near-death experiences. And it says, Levavo, Levav Kol Yisrael, his heart is the pumping heart of all Am Yisrael, for all the Doros, of all of Kol Yisrael, is that this helps us to become resilient. And one of the things that can help someone move from trauma to really flourishing in their life and making their imprint is to know that there's a purpose to it. And there's a purpose to our pain in this world. I think that's the first thing to know. That our trauma doesn't define us. We can mold it into something that is like fuel for our mission in this world. But we don't want to be victim to the trauma. We don't either want to be survivors, we want to be thrivers. That's the first thing, is to know that we can cope and that we have everything inside of us. No therapist, no teacher, no rabbi is going to create. Hashem created everything in us innately, whether it's physiologically or the resources that we have a drive to live and to matter and to connect. Sometimes that drive is dampened, but it's in us. When you go to a therapist, it's not to create anything new. It's to light up the parts of you that got dimmed because of different events. That's the first thing I would say, is your greatness comes out of your pain. I really do believe that. Do you believe that?
I believe that. My question, though, is that one of the things you said about trauma is that trauma makes you not believe that. So then, what do you do then? Trauma makes you believe that there's something wrong with you, right? From what I understood,
Right.
and that it maybe feels like this does define you in the moment. So then, how
Right.
does a person get to step one if they have trauma?
Okay. So we're not talking about the steps and the different therapies. There are plenty of therapies out there. And again, not every person who experienced a trauma is going to change all their assumptions. Someone who experienced it severely or prolonged or has PTSD will believe that. But I think it would be hard pressed to find anyone who hasn't experienced some type of big T trauma or little t trauma. I think we all have. And to that I answer, yes, that is not to glue us together so that we can be subpar humans. That is to purify us and make us into our incredible selves. All the great, poets, artists, heads of chesed organizations, heads of, organizations that help, people who have lost children or who, helping the sick. They themselves have grieved and have lost someone they love, and they made greatness out of it. What I said before about trauma and being stuck is then a person actually needs help when it turns into a clinical picture. So yes, you go to therapy, and there are different modalities, whether it's EMDR or somatic experiencing, whether it's inner child work or it's cognitive processing therapies, or there's just so many, or if it's IFS, there's mind body, it could be breath work. There's just so many ways to dislodge it. That is the work that has to be done, is to move the beliefs and move your body into action again, that you feel like you could cope and that life is a place that's safe for you. But those are a certain category of people. But trauma is, we're going to learn to embrace it and to grow great from it and to build from it and not to let it define us.
What are things that you, in your experience working with so many young women, once they end up in your office, maybe you've seen this again and again to the point that you think, I wish that young women knew this without having to end up in my office. The
Ah,
things that you end up teaching people who have been through trauma that then, they've grown from it in such a way. And you're like, oh, I wish that this is something that everybody without chas v'shalom also having to go through trauma can know.
ah, great. Yes, what I wish. So funny. If you ask me, like, what do I wish I owned? What do I wish I bought? What would I do if I had, $10 million? Honestly, I have no clue. But I have a clue over here. The first thing would be what I said before is like, your trauma doesn't define you. Your greatness defines you. Okay. The second thing is learn CBT, because if people would be able to behaviorally and cognitively think differently and train themselves to think that way, then we would see a lot less self-esteem issues and depression, anxiety, and obviously, you asked me the question, like, what would I want them to have before they have to even come in, right? What would I want them to have? Which
Yeah.
tools? So I think
Yeah.
it's really important. I don't think that you can do a standalone therapy with cognitive behavioral therapy, but it is really, really great skill set for everyone. When my kids were teens, all got them books in Hebrew, in English, for all their friends in yeshiva. Just leave it around in the bathrooms. Everyone knows some CBT. It's so helpful. Teenagers are so lost with their
Wow.
self-esteem. And the other thing, which might surprise you, and obviously not everybody is going to be able to access as part of themselves or want to or should be able to. But eventually, before pathology sets in, when there's just some struggle, so we have CBT and Shar Bitachon. Shar Bitachon is just so invaluable because when a person's already gone through the heavy duty trauma, they're, Hashem issues are really big. And nobody could judge anyone for having those angry at Hashem issues or you abandon me issues. And they're not even issues. It's a relationship. And you left me in this relationship. One of the first things with mental health, one of the first things to go, what I find is davening. Goes. Anxiety, depression, trauma, no davening, even for big daveners, which is completely understandable. But before they come into the office, when they have a little struggle and they went through something and they're still in their wellness, in a place to be able to find the skill sets, I would say, learn the CBT, learn some Shar Bitachon, and let Hashem hold it with you is the best thing you could give to yourself, together with exercise and good sleep. There's a lot of seminary girls or alumni there. One of the tragedies, sorry to say, of seminary is lack of sleep. It's tragedy is not really the right word, but it's a how do you say, an avla? It's something that's shouldn't happen. It really contributes to poor mental health. So getting sleep and nutrition and
Wow.
exercise is like one prong. The Shar Bitachon and the CBT, like, work with that. Anyone out there listening could take on those if you can. If you're stuck, so then you can get help. But if you're in a place that you feel that you can, that sandwich, and do really good for yourself, and you deserve to feel good.
Wow. That's amazing. I always thought of CBT as something that you end up learning if you end up in therapy. So I'm really glad that you're saying that this is something that is a tool for life. It's not like a band-aid if something happened to you.
Oh no, I use it. I tell my clients, I use it on myself every day, a few times a day. There's two really good books. One is the basic one. It's called Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. And that's more like on depression and on perfectionism and procrastination. But that's the basic book. Everyone should have it. The other one is called the Worry Cure. All my clients know I love that book. It's called the Worry Cure. It's for worriers, and especially since COVID, I see a tremendous amount of anxiety, and it's anxiety. It's not about panic. There's another book called When Panic Attacks, but the Worry Cure. It's by Dr. Lay, Ley. AHY. Amazing. So if you're a worrier, so learn some CBTs and put your mind at rest. And of course, mindfulness is really important also.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Shula. I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen today. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and to hear from you. I think of trauma completely differently now. And I do think that I had a bit of a stigma in my head when I said trauma of like almost like brokenness. And I think that you've very clearly shown us that this is just the next step that Hashem gave a lot of us to get higher. And Bezras Hashem, I wish all of our listeners that they should be able to take all of the struggles that they've gone through and should be able to rise and grow from them and see how it's leading them to the goodness in their life. And really, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of On Your Own. If you like this episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I would love to connect with you. If you've got any questions, feedback, or ideas for future episodes, you can email me at onyourownpodcast@gmail.com. See you next week. And in the meantime, happy adulting.